September 1940, London burned. Night after night, German bombers found their targets with uncanny precision despite complete darkness and British blackout regulations. The Luftwaffe navigated through clouds, fog, and moonless nights to strike factories, docks, and city centers with accuracy that defied explanation. British air raid wardens stood on rooftops scanning the darkness, listening for the distinctive throb of Heinkel He-111 and Junkers Ju-88 engines. They could hear the bombers overhead, they could see the incendiary fires and explosions, but they could not understand how German pilots found specific targets in total darkness. The puzzle confounded military planners at the highest levels. German bombing accuracy during night raids exceeded what British bomber crews could achieve in daylight with clear visibility. Something was guiding the Luftwaffe bombers with invisible hands. In a cramped office at the Air Ministry in London, a 28-year-old physicist named Reginald Victor Jones studied intelligence reports with growing alarm. Jones had been appointed Assistant Director of Intelligence Research Scientific in September 1939, just as war began. He was, for all practical purposes, Britain's entire scientific intelligence capability. One man, one desk, one filing cabinet. Born September 29, 1911, in Herne Hill, South London, Jones had grown up the son of a Grenadier Guards sergeant. His father had alternated between military service and work as a postman. The family had modest means but valued education. Young Reginald attended Alliance School in Dulwich on scholarship, demonstrating exceptional aptitude for physics. At Wadham College, Oxford, Jones studied natural sciences and graduated with first-class honors in 1932. His doctoral research at the Clarendon Laboratory under Professor Frederick Lindemann explored infrared detection work that would prove remarkably relevant to wartime intelligence. By 1936, he had joined the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough, working on air defense problems. Now, in September 1940, those problems had become desperately urgent. Jones spread reconnaissance photographs across his desk. German bombers were hitting precise targets, railway junctions, factory complexes, dock facilities with consistency that could not be luck alone. British bomber crews attempting similar raids in darkness scattered their bombs across the countryside, often missing targets by miles. The clues began arriving in fragments. A prisoner of war mentioned something called Knickerbein during interrogation, crooked leg in German. The prisoner, a Luftwaffe wireless operator, had let the term slip casually, then refused to elaborate. British interrogators noted the word but had no context. Another clue came from captured German bombers. Royal Air Force technicians examining the wreckage found wireless equipment that seemed unnecessarily sophisticated for simple communication. The radio receivers had unusual narrow-band filters and peculiar calibration marks. Jones connected these fragments with earlier intelligence. In November 1939, a mysterious document had arrived at the British Embassy in Oslo, Norway. The Oslo Report, an anonymous 7-page typescript describing German weapons development. Most British intelligence officers dismissed it as disinformation. The information seemed too detailed, too comprehensive, too convenient. But Jones read the Oslo Report with different eyes. The document described rocket development at Peenemünde, radar systems, proximity fuses, and critically radio navigation beams for guiding bombers at night. The technical details had the ring of truth. Jones filed the report carefully and waited to see if reality would confirm its predictions. By April 1940, reality was confirming those predictions with disturbing regularity. Prisoners mentioned Knickerbein. Captured equipment showed sophisticated radio receivers. German bombing accuracy at night was impossible to explain otherwise. Jones worked methodically through the puzzle. If the Germans were using radio beams for navigation, those beams must operate at specific frequencies. They must be transmitted from ground stations. They must be detectable by British monitoring equipment. The physics was straightforward. The implications were terrifying. A radio beam guidance system would allow the Luftwaffe to strike any target in Britain with precision regardless of weather or darkness. British cities could be systematically destroyed. Factories manufacturing aircraft and munitions could be eliminated. The entire British war effort could be crippled. Squadron leader Robert Bluck provided the crucial breakthrough. Bluck had been analyzing prisoner interrogation transcripts and noticed repeated references to a navigation system. German pilots described flying along radio signals that kept them on course. They mentioned hearing dots in one ear and dashes in the other through their headphones. When the sounds merged into a steady tone, they knew they were flying correctly. It was the Lorenz blind landing system, commercial aviation technology developed before the war, but adapted for long-range navigation. Jones felt the pieces clicking into place. The Lorenz system was brilliant in its simplicity. Two directional radio transmitters broadcast overlapping beams, one transmitting Morse code dots, the other dashes. Where the beams overlapped precisely, the dots and dashes merged into a continuous tone, the equisignal zone. An aircraft flying along this narrow zone would stay on course toward a predetermined target. The Germans had scaled this technology up massively. Instead of guiding aircraft the final few miles to an airport runway, they were guiding bombers hundreds of miles from transmitters in Germany and occupied Europe to targets deep in England. But Jones still needed physical proof. He needed to detect an active beam. Without this evidence, he was simply another young scientist with an elaborate theory. On June 12, 1940, Jones got his opportunity to present his findings to the highest levels of British command. Winston Churchill, recently appointed Prime Minister, had developed a keen interest in scientific intelligence. His chief scientific advisor, Professor Frederick Lindemann, Jones's former mentor at Oxford, had arranged a meeting in the cabinet room at No. 10 Downing Street. Jones arrived carrying a briefcase stuffed with intelligence reports and technical analyses. He was 28 years old. The men waiting in the cabinet room included Churchill Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, Commander-in-Chief of Fighter Command Air Marshal Sir Philip Joubert, and other senior military commanders. The pressure was immense. If Jones was wrong, he would waste precious resources chasing phantom threats. If he was right but failed to convince this audience, Britain might lose the war before fully understanding why. Jones spread his materials on the cabinet room table and began to speak. He described the Oslo report and its predictions that had already proven accurate. He presented the prisoner interrogation transcripts, mentioning Knickebein. He showed the unusual radio equipment recovered from crashed German aircraft. He explained the physics of radio beam navigation and why it would give the Luftwaffe unprecedented bombing accuracy. Churchill listened intently, occasionally asking penetrating questions. Dowding leaned forward with visible concern. What good were Supermarine Spitfire and Hawker Hurricane fighters if German bombers could navigate by invisible radio signals regardless of fighter interception? At the end of Jones's presentation, Churchill turned to his military commanders. The decision was immediate and unanimous. If these beams existed, they had to be found immediately. If they could be found, they had to be jammed. Churchill ordered an immediate search. Flight Lieutenant Hal Bufton would fly a specially equipped Avro Anson trainer aircraft on the night of June 21st to search for the beams Jones predicted. 9 days later, Jones would learn whether his scientific intuition had uncovered Germany's secret weapon or led Britain's defenses on an expensive chase after phantoms. The invisible war was about to become visible. June 21st, 1940. 2100 Royal Air Force, Whiten, Cambridgeshire. Flight Lieutenant Hal Bufton climbed into the cockpit of Avro Anson N9752. His wireless operator, Corporal Mackey, settled into the radio operator's position behind him. Their mission was unlike any either man had flown before, searching for invisible radio beams that might not exist. The Anson was a twin-engine training aircraft, reliable but slow, with a maximum speed of barely 190 miles per hour. Tonight it would serve as Britain's scientific reconnaissance platform. Bufton carried explicit instructions from Dr. Reginald Victor Jones. Fly north along a specific route. Listen continuously on frequencies between 30 and 33 megahertz. Report any unusual signals. Return before dawn. The Anson's engine settled into a steady roar. Bufton taxied to the runway and lifted into the darkening sky. Below, England was blacked out, every window curtained, every street lamp extinguished. The blackout made navigation difficult for British pilots. It was supposed to make navigation impossible for German bombers. But if Jones was correct, darkness meant nothing to the Luftwaffe. Mackey tuned his radio receiver carefully, sweeping through the frequencies Jones had specified. For the first hour, he heard only static and atmospheric interference. Buffton flew north, maintaining steady altitude and course, while Mackey continued his electronic vigil. Shortly after 2200 hours, Mackey suddenly sat upright. Through his headphones came a sound that made his pulse quicken. A series of distinct dots, steady and mechanical, pulsing at 60 beats per minute. He signaled Buffton urgently. The pilot adjusted course slightly, flying toward the signal's apparent source. As they continued north, the dots persisted. Then, gradually, the dots began to merge. The distinct beats blended into a continuous tone, smooth and uninterrupted. Mackey was hearing the equisignal, the zone where two overlapping radio beams met precisely. Buffton flew steadily through this zone. On the northern edge, the continuous tone separated again, but now into dashes instead of dots. They had crossed the beam. Mackey took bearings and measurements. The beam was extraordinarily narrow, no more than 50 yards wide at their altitude. It cut through the darkness like an invisible searchlight pointing toward England. Buffton reversed course and flew back through the beam, confirming the measurements. The beam was real. It was active. It was exactly where Jones had predicted. They followed the beam's path and discovered something even more significant. A second beam intersected the first over Derby, England, specifically over the Rolls-Royce factory that manufactured Merlin engines for Spitfire and Hurricane fighters. Any German bomber flying along the first beam would know to drop its bombs the moment it entered the second beam. Dr. Jones's suspicions had been correct. The Kinnickebane system existed. It was operational, and it was targeting Britain's most critical industrial facilities. Buffton and Mackey returned to Whiten shortly before dawn. By sunrise, a courier was racing toward London carrying the most significant intelligence find of the early war. Jones received the report at the Air Ministry later that morning. He had been right about the beam's existence. But being right meant Britain faced a threat more serious than many had imagined. The Kinnickebane system was elegantly simple. Two transmitters broadcast directional beams that intersected over the target. German bombers equipped with standard Lorenz receivers could follow these beams from occupied Europe to any point in England. The bomber crews needed no sophisticated navigation skills, no visual landmarks, no clear weather. Within days of Buffton's detection flight, the telecommunications research establishment at Swanage began developing countermeasures under Dr. Robert Cockburn. The British approach was characteristically practical. If the Germans were broadcasting directional beams, the British would broadcast false signals on the same frequencies. The first countermeasure was almost comically improvised. British scientists requisitioned medical diathermy machines, devices used in hospitals for therapeutic heating, and modified them to transmit powerful radio signals on Kinnickebane frequencies. These makeshift jammers were given the codename Aspirin. The concept was simple but effective. German bomber crews listening for the equisignal would instead hear British jamming signals, superimposing false dots and dashes. The pilots would think they were on course when actually they were being led astray. Wing Commander Edward Addison established No. 80 Wing Royal Air Force at Radlett, north of London, specifically to operate the countermeasure stations. By late June, the first Aspirin transmitters were operational. British operators monitored German beam transmissions constantly, identifying target cities by beam intersections and activating appropriate countermeasures. The Battle of the Beams had begun in earnest, but the Germans proved remarkably adaptive. When aspirin jamming disrupted raids, German engineers modified their equipment. They increased transmitter power. They changed frequencies without warning. The Luftwaffe began deploying dedicated Pathfinder units, Kampfgruppe 100, equipped with the most advanced navigation equipment. By August 1940, intelligence reports suggested the Luftwaffe was deploying a new system. Prisoner interrogations mentioned X-Gerät, X-apparatus, used exclusively by the elite Kampfgruppe 100. This system appeared far more accurate and harder to jam than Kinnickebane. The opportunity to understand X-Gerät came on November 6, 1940, when a Heinkel He-111 bomber of Kampfgruppe 100 ditched off the English coast near West Bay, Bridport. Feldwebel Hans Lehmann, the pilot, had been having equipment problems. Lost and low on fuel, he ditched in the sea. Royal Air Force launches raced to the scene. The Heinkel had sunk, but the crew was rescued. More importantly, the waterlogged X-Jurat equipment was recovered. British scientists discovered the X-Jurat receiver incorporated an automatic decoding mechanism with an extremely narrow frequency filter. Instead of requiring pilots to manually interpret dots and dashes, the system automatically processed signals and displayed a pointer reading in the cockpit. More critically, the frequency filter was sharply tuned to 2000 Hz, not the 1500 Hz that Jones had initially estimated. British bromide jammers had been broadcasting on the wrong frequency. The German automatic receiver simply ignored the British jamming as noise outside its frequency range. Jones read the technical analysis with sinking realization. British countermeasures against X-Jurat had been ineffective because of a fundamental frequency error. The Germans had been bombing with full X-Jurat accuracy for weeks. The discovery came on November 6th. The bromide jammers could be retuned quickly, but modifying all countermeasure stations would take days. On November 10th, British cryptographers at Bletchley Park decoded a German Enigma message referring to Operation Mondschein Sonate. Moonlight Sonata. The message indicated a major raid scheduled during the full moon period around November 14th. 3 possible targets were identified by code names. The British had decoded 2, Wolverhampton and Birmingham. The third target remained encoded. It was designated Corn. On the afternoon of November 14th, a monitoring aircraft detected X-Jurat beams intersecting over a specific English city. The beams were pointing at Coventry. Jones immediately understood the implications. Coventry was a major industrial center, aircraft engine factories, munitions plants, machine tool manufacturers. It was also a medieval city, with narrow streets and densely packed buildings, highly vulnerable to firebombing. The British frantically prepared countermeasures, but the retuned bromide jammers had not been fully tested. The frequency settings were still being verified when darkness fell. At 1920 hours, the first Heinkel bombers of Kampfgruppe 100 crossed the English coast. Their X-Jurat equipment worked perfectly, guiding them toward Coventry despite British jamming attempts. They dropped marker flares over the city center. The main bomber force followed within minutes. The raid continued for 11 hours. By dawn, central Coventry had been devastated. Over 500 people were dead. The medieval cathedral was destroyed. Factories were burning. The Coventry raid represented both British intelligence's greatest success and most painful failure. Jones had correctly predicted the raid. He had correctly identified the target. But the frequency error meant countermeasures were ineffective when they mattered most. Jones wrote later that Enigma signals to the X-beam stations were not decoded in time. Churchill returned to London that afternoon, suggesting he believed London was the likely target. The myth that Churchill deliberately sacrificed Coventry was contradicted by the facts. The British simply did not have enough time or accurate information. But from failure came knowledge. Within days, properly tuned bromide jammers were operational at all countermeasure stations. On November 19th, just 5 days after Coventry, the Luftwaffe launched another major raid targeting Birmingham. The retuned bromide jammers disrupted the X-Jurat beams successfully. German bombers scattered their loads across the countryside. British countermeasures had finally achieved their purpose. This was a war of scientists and engineers, fought with radio waves and electronic circuits. Victory would go to whichever side could outthink and outadapt the other. And at the center of Britain's effort stood Dr. Reginald Victor Jones, 28 years old, armed with scientific intuition and determination. He had found the invisible threat. Now he would have to defeat it. The crooked leg had been found. The real battle was just beginning. Winter 1941. The electronic war evolved with relentless speed. By January, British bromide jammers had rendered X-Jurat nearly useless. German bomber accuracy plummeted. Raids targeting industrial cities scattered bombs across empty countryside. Kampfgruppe 100, once the Luftwaffe's elite pathfinding unit, found its vaunted precision navigation system defeated by British countermeasures. but German engineers were already developing a response. Intelligence reports reaching Dr. Reginald Victor Jones suggested a third system was being deployed, something even more sophisticated than X-Girat. The system was called Y-Girat, also known as Wotan-2. Unlike Knickbehn's crossed beams or X-Girat's multiple timing beams, Y-Girat used a revolutionary single-beam approach with ground-based tracking. Jones first learned of Y-Girat through prisoner interrogations and fragmentary radio intercepts. The name itself provided a clue. Jones consulted Dr. Charles Frank, a German literature expert at Bletchley Park, about the significance of Wotan. Frank explained that Wotan was the one-eyed god of Germanic mythology. One-eyed, single beam. Jones understood immediately. Y-Girat worked on entirely different principles than its predecessors. A powerful ground transmitter broadcast a single directional beam toward the target. Aircraft equipped with Y-Girat receivers would fly into this beam and automatically transmit the signal back to the ground station, functioning as an airborne transponder. The ground station measured the time delay between transmitting the original signal and receiving the reflected signal from the aircraft. This provided precise distance information. By tracking the aircraft's position continuously and comparing it to predetermined coordinates, ground controllers could guide the bomber with extraordinary accuracy, even correcting course deviations in real time. The beauty of the system lay in its sophistication. The bomber crew didn't need to interpret signals or follow beam intersections. Ground controllers handled all navigation calculations and transmitted simple course corrections directly to the aircraft. The pilot simply followed the instructions received through his headphones. British scientific intelligence faced a new challenge. Y-Girat operated on different frequencies than previous systems, around 45 MHz. The automatic transponder system made simple jamming ineffective. Disrupting the signal would alert German ground controllers immediately that countermeasures were active. Jones needed a more subtle approach. If simple jamming wouldn't work, perhaps deception would. The solution came through inspired improvisation. The British Broadcasting Corporation operated powerful transmitters at Alexandra Palace in North London. These transmitters, normally used for television broadcasts, could be rapidly retuned to operate on Y-Girat frequencies. The countermeasure, codenamed Operation Domino, was elegantly simple yet technically complex. British listening stations at Swains Lane, Highgate, would intercept the transponder signal from German aircraft. This signal would be immediately retransmitted by the Alexandra Palace transmitter at much higher power, creating a false return signal to the German ground station. The German controllers would receive two signals, the genuine reflection from their aircraft and the false British signal arriving slightly later. The time difference would make it appear the aircraft was further from the target than it actually was. Course corrections based on this false data would guide bombers away from their intended targets. The technical challenge was maintaining precise frequency synchronization. Any drift between the British transmitter and German signal would create telltale beat frequencies that would alert German operators to the deception. British engineers developed ingenious feedback systems using post office landlines to connect the Swains Lane receiver to the Alexandra Palace transmitter, automatically correcting any frequency drift. Wing Commander Derek Jackson led the technical implementation. Jackson was an extraordinary individual, a wealthy businessman, accomplished steeplechase jockey, and brilliant physicist, who had studied spectroscopy before the war. He brought both scientific rigor and practical ingenuity to the challenge. The first test of Operation Domino came in early 1941. German bombers equipped with Y-Girat approached London, their transponders active. British operators at Swains Lane detected the signals and activated the Alexandra Palace transmitter. The deception worked perfectly. German ground controllers, receiving false distance readings, transmitted course corrections that led the bombers astray. Luftwaffe Oberleutnant Werner Hoffmann, a Pathfinder pilot with Kampfgruppe 100, later described the confusion. Our ground controllers seemed certain of our position, but the landmarks below didn't match. We dropped our markers where instructed, but post-raid reconnaissance showed we had missed the target by kilometers. The equipment appeared to function perfectly, yet the results were consistently wrong. The psychological impact on German crews was devastating. They had absolute faith in their ground controllers and sophisticated equipment. When both appeared to function correctly yet consistently produced failures, bomber crews lost confidence in their navigation systems entirely. Jones studied the results with satisfaction. British countermeasures had evolved from crude jamming to sophisticated electronic deception. Each German innovation had been met with British counter-innovation. The Invisible War had become a contest of scientific creativity. But Jones understood this success built upon earlier intelligence that many had dismissed. He returned frequently to the Oslo Report, that mysterious document that had arrived in November 1939. The anonymous report continued to prove its value. Nearly every German technological development mentioned in those 7 typewritten pages had materialized exactly as described: radio navigation beams, radar systems, proximity fuses, rocket development at Peenemünde. Each prediction had proven accurate. Jones often wondered about the author. Who was this German scientist, with access to such comprehensive intelligence? What motivated him to betray his country's military secrets? How had he compiled such detailed technical information across so many classified programs? The report had mentioned items Jones was still investigating, including references to long-range rockets and advanced radar systems. These predictions suggested threats that had not yet materialized, but might emerge in the future. The Oslo Report served as Jones's roadmap to German weapons development. British intelligence made discreet inquiries through neutral channels, attempting to identify the source. The anonymous author had requested confirmation through a specific BBC broadcast phrase. After receiving that confirmation, a package had been delivered containing the report and a proximity fuse sample. Then silence. No further contact. No additional information. Jones preserved the Oslo Report carefully, reviewing it periodically for insights into emerging threats. Every German technological surprise became less surprising when Jones discovered references in the Oslo Report. The document had transformed from dismissed curiosity to invaluable strategic intelligence. By spring 1941, the Battle of the Beams was approaching its conclusion. Germany was preparing Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Luftwaffe bomber forces would be transferred east, away from the battle over Britain. The sophisticated beam navigation systems would be repurposed for the Eastern Front. British countermeasures had achieved their strategic objective. They had not prevented all German bombing. The destruction of Coventry demonstrated that painful reality. But they had prevented the systematic destruction of British industry that precise navigation would have enabled. Factories continued producing aircraft. Shipyards continued building vessels. The war effort survived. Jones later calculated that British electronic countermeasures had reduced German bombing accuracy by approximately 70%. Bombs that should have destroyed specific factories instead fell on open field. Raids targeting critical infrastructure scattered their loads across residential areas where damage, while tragic, was strategically less significant. More importantly, the Battle of the Beams had established scientific intelligence as a critical component of modern warfare. Jones had demonstrated that understanding enemy technology was as important as possessing superior technology. Clever countermeasures could defeat superior equipment. Intelligence and innovation could overcome material disadvantages. The Invisible War had been won, not through superior force, but through superior understanding. One young physicist with scientific intuition had identified threats that senior military commanders had dismissed. His persistence had saved countless lives and preserved Britain's capacity to continue fighting. But the war was far from over, and the Oslo Report suggested new threats were emerging, threats that would test Jones's abilities even more severely than radio beams ever had. Spring 1943. The nature of the threat was changing. Dr. Reginald Victor Jones stood in his Air Ministry office examining reconnaissance photographs of a remote Baltic coast facility. Peenemünde, the location mentioned in the Oslo Report nearly 4 years earlier, was finally revealing its secrets. The photograph showed something unprecedented. Large cylindrical objects on transport vehicles, massive concrete structures, test stands designed for engines producing extraordinary thrust. This was not another radio navigation system. This was something far more dangerous. The Oslo Report had predicted it with eerie accuracy. They have in Peenemünde a facility for testing large rockets, The anonymous author had been correct about radio beams, radar systems, and proximity fuses. Now his warnings about rockets demanded immediate attention. Jones worked closely with RAF Flight Lieutenant Constance Babington Smith, a photographic interpretation expert at RAF Medmenham. Babington Smith possessed extraordinary visual acuity and patience, examining reconnaissance photographs with meticulous attention to detail that others missed. She identified features in aerial imagery that appeared insignificant to untrained observers, but revealed crucial intelligence to those who understood what to look for. Together, Jones and Babington Smith analyzed dozens of reconnaissance missions over Peenemünde. The facility was massive, encompassing production halls, test facilities, housing for thousands of workers, and launch sites positioned to fire weapons across the Baltic Sea toward carefully monitored impact zones. Flight Lieutenant Babington Smith made the breakthrough discovery. In photographs taken June 23, 1943, she identified what appeared to be small aircraft on rails, but without cockpits or conventional control surfaces. The objects were approximately 20 feet long, with stubby wings and a cylindrical fuselage. They were positioned on inclined ramps pointing northwest. Jones studied the photographs intently. These were not aircraft in any conventional sense. They were unmanned flying bombs, what would become known as the Vergeltungswaffe I, or V-1 flying bomb. Additional reconnaissance revealed larger cylindrical objects, far bigger than the flying bombs. These appeared to be rockets approximately 40 feet long and 6 feet in diameter. The V-2 ballistic missile. Both weapons represented entirely new categories of threat. The V-1 was essentially a pilotless aircraft, powered by a pulse jet engine. It would be launched from a ramp, fly at approximately 400 miles per hour toward its target, and dive when its fuel expired. Simple, cheap, and producible in large numbers. The V-2 was far more sophisticated, a true ballistic missile powered by liquid fuel rocket engines. It would climb to altitudes exceeding 50 miles, travel at supersonic speeds, and impact its target with no warning. There was no defense against a weapon that descended from the stratosphere faster than sound. Jones presented his findings to the War Cabinet in June 1943. Prime Minister Winston Churchill listened grimly as Jones described the threat. If Germany deployed these weapons in quantity against London, the results could be catastrophic. Unlike bombers that could be intercepted or radio beams that could be jammed, rockets arriving at supersonic speed offered no opportunity for defense. Churchill made a difficult decision. On the night of August 17 through 18, 1943, over 600 Royal Air Force bombers attacked Peenemünde in Operation Hydra. The raid was costly. 40 aircraft lost, but it achieved its objective. German rocket development was delayed by months. Key scientists were killed. Production facilities were damaged, but the Germans adapted. Manufacturing was dispersed to underground facilities. Launch sites were constructed along the French and Dutch coasts. Development continued with increased security and deception measures. Jones shifted his intelligence focus to identifying launch sites and understanding weapon characteristics. Every piece of information mattered. Engine burn time determined range. Guidance systems revealed vulnerabilities. Production rates indicated the scale of the threat. British intelligence discovered that V-2 missiles used radio guidance during their boost phase. This created a potential vulnerability. If British jamming could disrupt the guidance signals during launch, missiles might veer off course or fail to reach proper altitude. Jones coordinated with the Telecommunications Research Establishment to develop appropriate countermeasures. But radio jamming of rocket guidance proved far more difficult than jamming bomber navigation beams. The missiles moved too fast and required only brief guidance during launch. By the time British operators detected and located a launch, the missile was already beyond the boost phase. The V-1 flying bombs proved more susceptible to countermeasures. Their radio-controlled gyroscopic guidance systems could be disrupted by jamming. More effectively, their consistent flight profiles made them vulnerable to fighter interception and anti-aircraft fire, once British defenses understood their characteristics. Wing Commander Roland Beaumont, flying a Hawker Tempest fighter, became one of the most successful V-1 interceptors. They flew straight and level at predictable altitude and speed. Once you understood their behavior, they became targets rather than threats. The challenge was catching them before they reached London. Jones also contributed to defensive deception. British double agents provided false intelligence to German controllers about V-1 impact points. By reporting that missiles were overshooting their targets when they were actually falling short, British intelligence induced German crews to reduce their missile range settings. The result was more V-1s falling harmlessly in the countryside rather than on London. The first V-1 attack came June 13, 1944, 1 week after D-Day. Over 9,000 V-1s would be launched against Britain before their launch sites were overrun by Allied armies advancing from Normandy. The weapons killed over 6,000 civilians and damaged thousands of buildings. But they failed to achieve their strategic objective of breaking British morale or disrupting the Allied invasion. The V-2 offensive began September 8, 1944. Over 3,000 missiles were launched, primarily against London and Antwerp. Each missile carried nearly 2,000 pounds of high explosive and struck without warning at supersonic speed. There was no defense. The missiles arrived before their sound reached the ground. Jones worked frantically to understand V-2 performance and identify vulnerabilities. British intelligence monitored German radio traffic, analyzed recovered missile fragments, and interviewed civilians who witnessed launches. Every detail contributed to understanding the weapon's capabilities and limitations. The effectiveness of Jones's intelligence work became clear in the final months of the war. British defenses shot down approximately 80% of V-1 flying bombs that reached the British coast. Those that penetrated defenses often missed their intended targets due to navigation errors induced by jamming and deception. V-2 missiles remained unstoppable, but intelligence about their launch locations allowed Allied bombers to attack supply lines and production facilities. The rate of V-2 attacks never reached the levels German planners intended. The Oslo report had provided the first warning. Jones's scientific intelligence had identified the threats as they developed. British countermeasures and military operations had limited their impact. It was scientific intelligence warfare at its most sophisticated, detecting threats before they materialized, understanding them as they developed, and coordinating responses across intelligence, technology, and military operations. The Battle of the Beams had been Jones's introduction to electronic warfare. The V-weapons campaign demonstrated how far scientific intelligence had evolved. From detecting radio beams to tracking ballistic missiles, Jones had pioneered an entirely new form of warfare. The war in Europe would end May 8, 1945. But the principles Jones established, scientific analysis of enemy technology, rapid development of countermeasures, and integration of intelligence with military operations, would shape warfare for generations to come. The invisible war had visible consequences, and Dr. Reginald Victor Jones had proven that scientific intelligence could be as important as armies and navies in determining the outcome of modern conflict. November 4, 1939. The British Embassy, Oslo, Norway. Captain Hector Boyes, the naval attaché, received an unusual letter. The anonymous correspondence offered detailed intelligence about German military technology, but only if a specific phrase was broadcast on the BBC German language service. The request was simple: change the introduction to "Hullo, hier ist London" instead of the standard opening. If the British were interested in the information, make this small alteration. If not, the matter would be forgotten. Boyes consulted with London. The request seemed harmless enough. On November 4th, the BBC broadcast the requested phrase. 1 week later, a package arrived at the embassy containing a 7-page typescript and a physical sample, a proximity fuse for anti-aircraft shells. The Oslo report was extraordinary. It described German radar development, including frequencies and capabilities. It detailed the Kinnekabine and X-rate radio navigation systems with remarkable accuracy. It revealed rocket research at Peenemünde. It mentioned remote-controlled gliders, acoustic torpedoes, and advances in aircraft design, including the Junkers Ju-88 bomber. Most recipients dismissed it as sophisticated German disinformation. The information seemed too comprehensive, too detailed, too convenient. Surely this was bait designed to mislead British intelligence and waste resources pursuing phantom threats. But Dr. Reginald Victor Jones read the report differently. The technical details had internal consistency. The physics was sound. The predictions were specific enough to be verified or disproven. Jones filed the Oslo report carefully and waited. By mid-1940, the report's predictions were proving accurate, with disturbing regularity. Knickebein beams existed exactly as described. German radar operated on the frequencies mentioned. The Junkers Ju-88 bomber performed as predicted. Peenemünde was revealed as a massive weapons research facility. Who was this anonymous scientist? Jones studied the report for clues. The author clearly had access to multiple classified programs across different branches of German military research. He understood both theoretical physics and practical engineering. He possessed detailed knowledge of testing facilities, production plans, and operational deployment schedules. The author had signed the report. A German scientist who is well disposed toward you. The motivation seemed clear: opposition to Nazi Germany. But the access suggested someone senior, well-connected and trusted by the regime. This created a paradox. How could someone holding such a privileged position within the German military-industrial complex also possess such profound opposition to the government? Jones made discreet inquiries through neutral channels, hoping to establish ongoing contact. The BBC broadcast additional coded phrases. British intelligence in Scandinavia watched for signals. But the phantom informant remained silent. After delivering the Oslo report, he vanished. The mystery deepened when Jones learned the author had included a letter to a British acquaintance, requesting indirect communication through a Danish colleague. But Germany's invasion of Denmark in April 1940 had severed that communication route. The phantom informant was trapped behind enemy lines with no safe means of contact. Jones continued using the Oslo report as his roadmap to German weapons development. Every prediction it contained received careful investigation. When intelligence suggested new German technologies, Jones checked the Oslo report first. Often he found references that provided context and direction for his investigations. The report mentioned items Jones had not yet encountered, references to long-range rockets using liquid fuel, advanced radar warning systems, and sophisticated electronic countermeasures. These predictions suggested the author possessed knowledge extending beyond current deployments into future development plans. Years later, after the war ended, Jones continued searching for the Oslo report's author. British intelligence conducted investigations across occupied Germany, interviewing scientists and reviewing captured documents. The author's identity remained elusive. The breakthrough came unexpectedly in 1955. A German physicist named Hans Ferdinand Mayer contacted Jones through intermediaries, requesting a meeting. Mayer had been imprisoned by the Gestapo in 1943 for political offenses. Fortunately, the Nazis never discovered his greatest act of defiance. He had survived Dachau concentration camp and other facilities until liberation in 1945. Jones and Mayer met privately. Mayer confirmed he had written the Oslo report during a business trip to Oslo in late October 1939. As director of Siemens Communication Research Laboratory, he had access to information across multiple military programs. His position required him to coordinate with various research facilities, giving him extraordinary insight into German weapons development. Mayer's motivation was straightforward. He opposed Hitler and believed Nazi Germany represented an existential threat to civilization. After Germany invaded Poland, Mayer decided to provide British intelligence with every military secret he could access. The Oslo report was his attempt to give Britain the information needed to develop effective countermeasures. Mayer had borrowed a typewriter from the Hotel Bristol in Oslo and typed the report over 2 days. He included the proximity fuse sample as proof of authenticity. Then he mailed the package and returned to Germany, knowing discovery meant certain death. Jones and Mayer agreed to keep Mayer's identity secret. The Oslo report was now public knowledge, but revealing the author's name might endanger him or his family. Mayer died in 1980. His identity as the Oslo report's author was not publicly revealed until 1989, 50 years after he had risked everything to warn Britain. The Oslo Report represented one of the most significant intelligence coups of World War II. A single anonymous document had provided British scientific intelligence with a comprehensive overview of German weapons development. Jones had built his entire intelligence operation on the foundation Meyer provided. Without the Oslo Report, Jones might have dismissed early warnings about radio navigation beams as improbable. Without its predictions about Peenemünde, British intelligence might have ignored the facility until V-weapons were already in production. Without its comprehensive technical details, British countermeasures might have been delayed by crucial months. Spring 1941. The electronic war spread beyond Britain. German beam systems appeared in the Mediterranean theater as Axis forces attempted to prevent British resupply of Malta. The island fortress, positioned strategically between Sicily and North Africa, was essential to Allied control of Mediterranean shipping lanes. German and Italian bombers attacked relentlessly, using radio navigation systems to guide night raids against Maltese ports and airfields. Dr. Reginald Victor Jones dispatched technical specialists to Malta, carrying portable monitoring equipment and jamming transmitters. The lessons learned over Britain would be applied to defend this crucial island. Squadron leader Edward Fennessy arrived in Malta in April 1941, bringing modified aspirin jammers and trained operators. The island was under siege. Food was scarce, fuel was rationed, and German bombs fell daily. But electronic countermeasures could be established with minimal resources. Fennessy and his team set up monitoring stations and hastily reinforced buildings, tracking German beam transmissions from Sicily and southern Italy. The tactical situation differed from Britain. Malta was small, only 17 miles long and 9 miles wide. German bombers needed less sophisticated guidance to find the island, but precise targeting of harbors, airfields, and submarine pens still required beam navigation. British jamming disrupted German precision attacks significantly. Bombs intended for Grand Harbor splashed into the Mediterranean. Raids targeting RAF Lucca airfield scattered explosives across empty fields. The siege continued, but Malta survived. Squadron leader Fennessy reported to Jones. The German beam operators seem increasingly frustrated. They change frequencies constantly, trying to find clean channels. Our jamming follows them within minutes. The Luftwaffe can still attack Malta, but they cannot destroy it with precision strikes. The Mediterranean campaign demonstrated that electronic warfare principles developed in Britain could be applied globally. Jones's scientific intelligence organization expanded, training specialists for deployment to multiple theaters. Each specialist carried technical documentation, monitoring equipment, and critically the understanding that electronic warfare was as important as conventional combat. North Africa presented different challenges. German forces under General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel used radio navigation to coordinate nighttime movements across the desert. British Eighth Army intelligence units monitored German communications, identifying beam transmissions that revealed troop movements and supply convoys. The technology transfer extended beyond British forces. As the United States entered the war in December 1941, Jones briefed American intelligence officers on German electronic warfare capabilities and British countermeasure techniques. Colonel Harold Zoll, United States Army Signal Corps, visited Jones in London during spring 1942. "We're facing similar threats in the Pacific. Japanese forces use radio navigation for bomber raids on Allied positions. Your experience with German systems provides the foundation we need to develop our own countermeasures." Jones shared technical details freely. The Battle of the Beams had taught Britain that electronic warfare knowledge was too valuable to hoard. American forces would face Japanese beam systems. Sharing British expertise accelerated American countermeasure development and saved time that would have been wasted rediscovering techniques already proven effective. The collaboration extended to equipment. American factories began producing jamming transmitters based on British designs. Technical modifications adapted the equipment for Pacific theater conditions. Higher humidity, extreme temperatures, and different frequency ranges used by Japanese systems. By 1943, electronic warfare had become a standard component of Allied military operations. Every major command included scientific intelligence officers trained in Jones's methods. Monitoring stations tracked enemy radio transmissions globally. Countermeasure equipment was deployed as routinely as anti-aircraft guns. The Allies' electronic warfare capabilities provided strategic advantages beyond defeating individual weapon systems. German commanders never knew whether their communications were compromised, their navigation systems were being jammed, or their radar was being deceived. This uncertainty forced conservative tactics and reduced operational effectiveness. Jones quantified the impact in reports to the War Cabinet. Electronic countermeasures had reduced German bombing accuracy by approximately 70%. Intelligence derived from monitoring enemy radio transmissions had prevented surprise attacks and revealed strategic intentions. The integration of scientific intelligence with military operations had created force multiplication effects impossible to achieve through conventional means alone. The principles established during the Battle of the Beams, rapid analysis of enemy technology, innovative countermeasure development, and seamless integration with military operations became doctrine. Post-war military organizations would establish permanent scientific intelligence branches based on Jones's wartime improvisation, but the human cost remained real. British cities bore scars from German bombing that countermeasures could not entirely prevent. Coventry's destroyed cathedral stood as a reminder that electronic warfare, however sophisticated, could not eliminate the tragedy of war, only mitigate it. Jones understood this with painful clarity. His countermeasures had saved lives by causing bombs to miss their targets. But bombs still fell. People still died. Victory in the invisible war reduced casualties, but did not eliminate them. The electronic warfare that began as one physicist detecting radio beams had evolved into a global effort involving thousands of specialists. The invisible war had become as crucial to Allied victory as the battles fought by soldiers, sailors, and airmen. And at the center of this transformation stood Dr. Reginald Victor Jones, the 28-year-old who had convinced Churchill that invisible threats required immediate action. His scientific intuition and unwavering determination had pioneered an entirely new form of warfare. The war would continue until May 1945, but the invisible war's outcome was already clear. Scientific intelligence had proven its value beyond doubt. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. Church bells rang across Britain for the first time in 6 years. Crowds filled Trafalgar Square and Piccadilly Circus, celebrating the end of the European War. Prime Minister Winston Churchill appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace alongside King George VI and the royal family, acknowledging the cheering masses below. Dr. Reginald Victor Jones stood quietly in his Air Ministry office, reviewing the final intelligence reports from Germany. The invisible war had ended months before the shooting war. German beam transmitters had fallen silent as Allied armies overran their positions. V-weapon launches ceased when manufacturing facilities were captured. The electronic battlefield had gone dark. Jones reflected on 6 years of continuous scientific intelligence operations. He had begun the war as a 28-year-old physicist, with one desk and one filing cabinet. He ended it leading an organization of hundreds of specialists who had transformed electronic warfare from improvisation into doctrine. The statistics told part of the story. British electronic countermeasures had reduced German bombing accuracy by approximately 70% across the entire war. Thousands of lives had been saved by bombs that missed their targets. Factories that should have been destroyed continued producing weapons. Ports that should have been closed remained operational. But statistics could not capture the human dimension. Jones thought of Coventry, the raid where his frequency measurements had been wrong by 500 Hz. 500 Hz. Such a small error. Such terrible consequences. Over 500 people dead because British jammers broadcast on 1500 Hz, when German receivers listened at 2000 Hz. He thought of the anonymous German scientist who had risked everything to send the Oslo report. Hans Ferdinand Meyer had survived Dachau concentration camp, but Jones would not learn his identity for another decade. The phantom informant remained phantom for now. He thought of Flight Lieutenant Hal Bufton and Corporal Mackey, flying their Avro Anson through the darkness on June 21, 1940, searching for radio beams that senior officers doubted existed. Their courage to fly into the unknown had validated everything. The Allied advance into Germany had revealed the full scope of German weapons research. Jones visited captured facilities at Peenemünde, examining the test stands where V-2 rockets had been launched. The scale of German technological effort was staggering. Tens of thousands of engineers and scientists working on advanced weapons that arrived too late or in insufficient numbers to change the war's outcome. British and American intelligence teams raced across Germany, competing with Soviet forces to capture scientists, equipment, and documentation. Operation Paperclip brought German rocket scientists to America. British teams secured radar experts and electronic warfare specialists. The knowledge gained from defeating German technology now became foundation for post-war developments. Jones interviewed captured German scientists and engineers. Many expressed surprise at how effectively British countermeasures had defeated their sophisticated systems. German beam navigation had seemed foolproof during development. German engineers had not anticipated the speed and creativity of British responses. Oberingenieur Johannes Plendel, who had developed the Knickebein system, told Jones, "We knew the British were intelligent, but we underestimated their scientific agility. Every time we deployed a new system, you developed countermeasures within weeks. We thought we were fighting a conventional war. You understood it was a war of innovation." The recognition came quickly. Jones was appointed Companion of the Order of the Bath in December 1945, a prestigious honor recognizing his wartime contributions. The citation remained classified, mentioning only distinguished service without specifying detail. The invisible war remained invisible to the public. Churchill wrote personally to Jones, "The work you did to counter the German beam systems and later the flying bomb was of the greatest value to the nation. Your scientific acumen and determination in the face of skepticism saved countless British lives." But Jones felt the weight of what had been lost alongside what had been saved. Britain had survived, but at enormous cost. Over 60,000 civilians had died in German bombing raids. Cities bore physical scars that would take decades to heal. The psychological trauma of the Blitz affected an entire generation. The war against Japan continued until August, when atomic bombs forced surrender. Jones had not been involved in the Manhattan Project, that had been a separate, highly compartmentalized effort. But he understood immediately that scientific intelligence had entered a new era. Nuclear weapons changed everything. Jones began thinking about the future. What role should scientific intelligence play in peacetime? How could Britain maintain the capabilities developed during wartime without the pressure of immediate crisis? What lessons from the invisible war should guide post-war defense planning? The military establishment recognized that scientific intelligence could not be disbanded like wartime units. The technological complexity of modern warfare demanded permanent expertise. Jones was asked to help design Britain's post-war scientific intelligence organization. But first, he needed rest. 6 years of relentless pressure had exhausted even his formidable intellectual energy. Jones returned to academic physics, accepting a position at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. He would teach, conduct research, and for the first time since September 1939, work on problems without immediate life or death consequences. The invisible war had been won. The visible wars in Europe and the Pacific had been won. Dr. Reginald Victor Jones had played a role in that victory that few would ever know about or understand. The Battle of the Beams, the V-weapons intelligence, the countless small victories in electronic warfare all had contributed to the final outcome. But Jones knew the invisible war never truly ends. Technology continues advancing. New weapons emerge. Future conflicts would be fought with tools not yet imagined. The principles he had established, rapid analysis, innovative countermeasures, integration with military operations, would remain relevant for generations. The 28-year-old physicist who had convinced Churchill that invisible threats were real had become a 34-year-old veteran of a war most people didn't know existed. His scientific intuition and unwavering determination had helped save Britain. 1978, 33 years after the war's end. Dr. Reginald Victor Jones, now 67 years old and a professor at the University of Aberdeen, published his memoir, Most Secret War. The book revealed for the first time the full story of Britain's scientific intelligence operations during World War II. Classified details could finally be shared with the public, who had been protected by secrets they never knew existed. The memoir became an immediate success. Readers discovered the invisible war that had been fought alongside the visible one. The Battle of the Beams, the Oslo Report, the V-Weapons intelligence, stories that had remained classified for over 3 decades finally entered public consciousness. Jones wrote with clarity and precision, explaining complex technical concepts in accessible language. He honored the contributions of colleagues who had worked in obscurity. He acknowledged failures alongside successes. The book demonstrated that scientific intelligence was not infallible genius, but rather persistent effort, creative thinking, and occasional luck. Critics praised the memoir as one of the finest accounts of World War II intelligence operations. Military historians recognized it as essential reading for understanding how technology and intelligence shaped the war's outcome. Physics students discovered that scientific principles had practical applications beyond laboratories. But Jones's influence extended far beyond one book. His post-war career had already established him as one of Britain's most respected scientists. After the war, Jones had accepted the chair of natural philosophy at the University of Aberdeen in 1946. He spent 25 years teaching physics to undergraduates while continuing to advise British defense and intelligence agencies on scientific matters. His lectures were legendary, combining rigorous physics with entertaining anecdotes from his wartime experiences, carefully edited to avoid classified information. Jones received numerous honors recognizing his wartime contributions. He was appointed Companion of the Order of the Bath in 1945. He was made a Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1946. In 1994, 3 years before his death, he was invested as a Companion of Honor, one of Britain's highest civilian honors, limited to just 65 living recipients. The scientific community recognized Jones's contributions through prestigious awards and fellowships. He was elected Fellow of the Royal Society in 1946, Britain's premier scientific honor. He received honorary doctorates from multiple universities. His scientific papers on infrared detection, the principles of electronic warfare, and intelligence analysis became foundational texts. But Jones's most significant legacy was not awards or honors. It was the transformation of scientific intelligence from wartime improvisation into permanent institutions. The methods he pioneered, rapid technical analysis, innovative countermeasure development, seamless integration with military operations, became standard practice in defense establishments worldwide. Modern electronic warfare traces directly to Jones's World War II innovations. Every military force now includes specialists trained in detecting, analyzing, and countering enemy electronic systems. The principles Jones established remain relevant in an age of GPS jamming, cyber warfare, and sophisticated electronic countermeasures. The United States Central Intelligence Agency invited Jones to speak at their headquarters in 1995. At 84 years old, he addressed a new generation of intelligence professionals about lessons from the Battle of the Beams. His core message remained unchanged. Understand enemy technology deeply, develop countermeasures creatively, integrate intelligence seamlessly with operations. CIA Director James Woolsey introduced Jones by saying, "The work this man did in World War II established the foundations of modern scientific intelligence. We are honored by his presence." Jones spoke without notes, his memory sharp despite advanced age. He emphasized that scientific intelligence required more than technical expertise. It demanded intuition, the ability to construct complete pictures from fragmentary evidence. It required persistence, continuing investigation, even when others dismissed threats as implausible. Most importantly, it required courage, presenting findings to senior decision-makers even when conclusions challenged conventional wisdom. The young intelligence officers listened intently as Jones described convincing Churchill that invisible radio beams threatened Britain. The story had been told countless times, but Jones's personal telling carried weight that no history book could match. He had been there. He had done it, and he had succeeded. Jones reflected on 60 years since he first detected the German radio beams. Technology changes, the threats evolve, but the principles remain constant. Understand your adversary's capabilities, develop innovative responses, act decisively when threatened. These lessons from the Battle of the Beams remain relevant today and will remain relevant for future generations. Dr. Reginald Victor Jones died December 17, 1997, at age 86. Obituaries appeared in newspapers worldwide, finally acknowledging publicly what had been known privately for decades. This quiet physics professor had been one of World War II's most important figures. His memorial service at Westminster Abbey included senior government officials, military commanders, and scientific leaders from multiple nations. The eulogy emphasized Jones's unique combination of scientific brilliance and practical wisdom. He had proven that one person, properly positioned and supported, could change history's course. The Invisible War Jones fought and won established principles that continue protecting lives today. Modern conflicts involve electronic warfare as routinely as conventional weapons. Intelligence agencies employ thousands of specialists doing work Jones pioneered alone. Defense establishments maintain permanent scientific intelligence branches based on organizations he created under wartime pressure. But perhaps Jones's greatest legacy is simply this: he demonstrated that invisible threats are real, that scientific intelligence can defeat them, and that one person's courage and determination can make extraordinary difference. The Battle of the Beams ended in 1941, but its echoes continue in every electronic warfare operation, every intelligence analysis, every scientific contribution to national defense. Dr. Reginald Victor Jones, the 28-year-old physicist who convinced Churchill that invisible radio beams threatened Britain, had transformed warfare forever. The invisible war never ends. But thanks to Jones, we know how to fight it.